Well, hello everybody, it's Richard Brett here. Absolutely great to see everybody. Seems a long time since we've all been together, in a manner of speaking. I hope everybody is keeping safe and well, and we're making the best possible use of the lockdown and the good weather that's gone with it. So we have been lucky in that respect. So we should all have immaculate gardens and very tidy houses. As you've probably gathered, this is the first time that we've attempted to hold a speaker meeting via the internet. So we're very much hoping that the technology works this afternoon. We're trying to keep things as much as possible the same as they would be if we were having the meeting in the Memorial Hall. Of course, it can't be quite the same. There'll be no warnings about what to do if somebody's taken ill. There'll be no talk about emergency exits, you'll be pleased to hear. And sadly, no tea and coffee afterwards, or at least no communal tea and coffee. Have to leave that to individuals, I suppose, to arrange themselves. But if the afternoon is a success, and we very much hope it will be, we may try to do this again in future months. Obviously, we'll need a speaker who is as accommodating as Sandy Walkington today has been, and is prepared to give their talk online. But if that can happen, and if the lockdown or the current restrictions continue, then we may try and do this again. Just a little word about the sound. Well, as I host this meeting on Zoom, I have the ability to mute everybody or switch the sound off. I'm doing that so that there will be as little interruption as possible when Sandy starts speaking. At the end, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and obviously at that point, we will unmute anybody who wants to ask a question. So I very much hope everybody enjoys this afternoon, and I'm going to hand over now to Janice Danby, who is our speaker secretary. Janice, I think you're muted at the moment, so you may have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just unmuted myself.
That's okay.
Hello everybody, it's lovely to see you all, and I'm glad this is working so far. Today we've got Sandy Walkington from the Arc and Arc, which is short for, and I will put my teeth in, St Albans and Hertfordshire Architectural and Archaeological Society. This year is their 175th anniversary, and they've done some wonderful things, which I'm sure he will tell you all about, and including the initiating the restoration of St Albans Abbey, and starting the campaign to save the clock tower in St Albans. Those are things which you will all be familiar with. And anyway, I will leave the rest for him to tell you all about and hand you over to Sandy.
Well, Janice, thank you very much, and thank you to everybody, because this is my first experience of trying to deliver a talk over the internet via Zoom. So we're all being guinea pigs today, and we've always prided ourselves on being innovative, and maybe this is another example of that. I might suggest that people all mute who are not actually speaking at this moment. It might be clever to avoid dogs and other things coming in. So anyway, I'm very pleased to be giving this talk. I have the honor, and it is an honor, of being president of the St Albans and Hertfordshire Architectural and Archaeological Society. A hell of a mouthful, as Janice said, which is why we call it the Arc and Arc for short. And we're 175, which is quite an achievement for a voluntary organization run entirely by amateurs. We're one of the oldest history societies anywhere in the UK. Queen Victoria had only been on the throne for 7 years when we were founded. And the title of this talk is Discover, Protect, Innovate, Inform, How the Ark Made St. Albans History, which is in some ways a slightly vainglorious boast, but we do actually think, and I hope I will explain in the course of the talk, that there are many history societies and they're jolly good at recording things and researching things and publishing things. Actually, over our history, we genuinely think that we have made significant innovations. We've contributed to big ticket items. We really have made history, not just in St. Albans, but with a national impact as well. Now I'm going to move to sharing my screen. So we're going to hope that this works. So the first picture I've got is the Abbey in its original state before Lord Grimthorpe got hold of it, because that was the main impetus to our being founded. It was this building. I mean, it's an amazing, mournful picture of just how shabby it looked, but that rather wonderful west front, when one is very sorry that that was demolished and replaced with Grimthorpe's concoction. But there we are. And it was a bunch of clergymen who were very concerned about the future of this building and also other medieval buildings in St. Albans and area, which were at risk from the Victorian enthusiasm for knocking everything down. And they were determined to try and rescue it. And they had a meeting in the rectory in Sandridge, not the current rectory, but a building on the same site. And that led to a formal meeting at the rectory in St. Albans in 1845, when we were founded. And if you go on our website, which is stalbanshistory.org, you'll find a jolly good story about that first day and the journey that Charles Boutell, who was the curate at Sandridge, would have made to travel from Sandridge Rectory to St. Albans in order to join that first meeting, and what he would have seen en route. It's a piece of fiction, but an entertaining piece of fiction. And here are two of our founding fathers. On the right, it's the Reverend Henry Nicholson, complete with mortarboard, and he was rector of St. Albans. And on the left is the second Earl of Verulam, who was our second president. The first president survived for all of about 2 or 3 months and then disappeared from the scene. I'm not quite sure why. And the second Earl then served as our president for 49 years, which is a kind of life sentence. I'm about to complete my own term as president of the society after only 3 years. That's the normal form now. But he was a really important person, very valuable, supported a lot of the work and archaeological digs on his own land, presented material to local museums, and it's his heirs, the present Earl and Countess of Verulam, are still our patrons and actively involved today. So we began as the St. Albans Architectural Society because the emphasis was on architecture and on the preservation of medieval buildings. And by the way, St. Albans was not just the city, it was the archdeaconry. So it was a larger area than just the city. I'm not sure whether that included Wheatomstead or not. I really must check whether the St. Albans Archdeaconry did or not. And we started as the Architectural Society, and then people started finding things. And of course, we're talking about that Victorian enthusiasm for archaeology. And so the first word in the title of this talk and in the exhibition, which is going to be held at the St. Albans Museum when there are exhibitions again, is the word discover, because that's what we started to do. And this first picture here shows the excavation of the Roman theatre at Gorhambury in 1847. And it was conducted by a man called Richard Lowe, who was also mayor of St Albans. In fact, there's a long history of mayors of St Albans being involved in our work. Elsie Toms, Kate Morris, the list is really rather long. In this picture, you can see St Albans Abbey on the top left and St Michael's Church through the trees on the top right, and then the theatre covering the whole rest of the picture. And this was published in a London magazine in 1847. And then there were a series of, if you can put it that way, slightly amateur excavations. And we really don't know much about a lot of the objects that were found. They were given to the museum and its predecessors, but without an awful lot of explanatory material. And there was a lot of stuff that we could have chosen to pick out, but this I particularly love. It's a bowl, probably Iron Age, but it could be Roman, but David Thorold, the current curator at the museum, thinks it's probably Iron Age. And I think it's just spectacular. I mean, look at that wonderful shape on it, which someone said to me, it's a fish. Well, it might be a fish, but if you saw that in St Ives for sale in a gallery, you'd probably want to buy it. I think it's the most wonderfully beautiful, iconic object, and just brings the past to life in the most extraordinary way. And that was one of the objects which members of our societies must have dug up, and then the Earl of Verulam, as the owner of the land, presented it to the museum. Two more objects here. On the left, a monastic tile. On the right, a fragment of an ivory book cover. By the way, this is a rather wonderful story because this came out of the Abbey Orchard, and there had been a formal excavation at the Abbey Orchard which found various things, but not this. And it was when a gardener was detailed to fill in the excavations, he found this. So it wasn't one of the archaeologists, it was actually the gardener that found this. It's an ivory book cover. It's now in the British Museum, although sadly not on display. That's another story. And nobody quite knows what it represents, but John Morwood, who is curating the exhibition about our history, he's looked at it and he thinks that's Absalom. And if you remember from the Bible, Absalom was David's son, and he rebelled against David, in the end got cornered, ran for his life riding a horse, got caught in a thicket, and the horse ran away from him, and he was left hanging from the thorns. And one of David's generals came along and chopped his head off. And then David did his great lament, "O Absalom, O Absalom." And I think it's a nice idea that that might be Absalom. It might not be. And there's a very good reproduction of the cover, which again, we are going to show, an actual replica of it that we're going to show in the exhibition that we plan to have at the museum. So moving on, I suppose the high point of the society and its role in archaeology were the excavations in the 1930s. The City Council had made its plans to create the park at Verulamium and the lake as part of job creation opportunities during the Great Depression. I mean, the lake was largely dug by South Wales miners. And they knew that they should do the archaeology first. And they came to the Ark and said, would we do it? And we were, shall we say, grown up enough to say, no, this is above our pay grade. We're happy to be involved, but actually we think there needs to be a professional input. And we came up with the idea of a bright young archaeologist at the Museum of London called Mortimer Wheeler being approached. And Mortimer Wheeler was duly approached and appointed as director of the excavation. And in his autobiography, Still Digging, he gives a hilarious description of a lunch given at the town hall in St Albans. and an hysterically funny speech given by the mayor, who was a butcher called Mr. Ironmonger, which was sort of wonderfully sort of confusing mixture of metaphors and images, but nevertheless, he describes this very affectionately. He was less keen on the bottle of Grave wine, which he thought was rather indifferent, but he recognized how significant it was that the City Council took archaeology seriously and had commissioned this work. And this picture here shows Mortimer Wheeler and Tessa Verney Wheeler, his wife. And she actually was a significant person, a significant archaeologist in her own right. Mortimer Wheeler was very good at PR. He went on to be the first television archaeologist, and he was good at Iron Age, but he wasn't very good at Roman stuff. And Tessa Verney Wheeler actually was far better than him on the Roman stuff. They were both members of our society, and she lectured every year on the discoveries that they had made in that season. And in the next picture, you can see her sweeping the Hippocaust floor. That's the mosaic floor which is underneath that now hideous concrete building in Verulamium Park. The mosaic is nice. I'm less convinced by the architecture above it. She died tragically young. She died in 1936 because of a botched operation. And there's a rather sad little gravestone marking where her ashes are buried in St. Stephen's Churchyard at the King Harry Junction in St. Albans. It's a bit looking unloved. There's a plaque to her at Verulamium Museum, but she really deserves much better remembrance. We do want to big her up when we have our exhibition at the museum, because she deserves it. This next picture, which is great fun, shows one of the volunteers, presumably from the society, at the excavation, and she's found something, and somebody has written, this is a picture in the museum collection at Verulamium, and someone's written whoopee underneath. But I like it best of all because of the kit she's using. She's clearly raided Dad's coal cellar, and there's the coal bucket and the shovel. And when you think about modern archaeological technology, you know, there she is, just, you know, wearing ordinary clothes and using ordinary gear and making the discovery. I don't know what it was that she found. The other aspect that's worth bringing up about the Wheeler excavation was it wasn't just at Verulamium. He also did Beach Bottom in St. Albans and Devil's Dyke at Wheatamstead. And this was really the first occasion when there was thinking done about the archaeology of a landscape. So it wasn't just digging up a site, it was recognizing that there was a whole context and landscape to be understood and researched. Now, I think now the view is that some of the conclusions that Wheeler drew, we would now argue with, but nevertheless, it was a significant moment in the development of archaeology. And of course, coming up to the present day, and many of you will recognize Chris Lockyer, third from right in this picture. We are, as a society, members of the Hertfordshire Community Archaeology and Geophysics Group, which is led by Chris in his role as director of the Welwyn Archaeological Society, but he's also a member and regular lecturer at our society, and I'm sure he's lectured to you. And his work, we're using modern techniques of geophysics and ground radar in order to investigate sites without having to dig. I've spent a very pleasant afternoon wheeling one of these devices up and down Gorhambury. It's easier going downhill than uphill, but it's like pushing one of those devices that groundsmen use to mark up cricket pitches. And they have been steadily mapping the entire of Verulamium. And I mean, I think one of the most interesting discoveries that they made in recent years was that they, in tracking it, these devices, they record post holes, they record building foundations, they record ditches, and they found an unmistakable ditch, but it went all over the shop. And they called it in the end, because they couldn't think what else to call it, the sinuous ditch. And they wondered, what is this sinuous ditch doing? And then Chris had the genius idea of mapping it onto the Ordnance Survey and discovered that it was absolutely at grade all the way. It was on a constant level. And he thought, aha, and worked out he'd discovered the aqueduct that served Roman Verulamium. And what they must have done is to dam the River Ver somewhere up by Redbourne and take it at level all the way down the valley, but steadily rising higher and higher up above the river natural channel. So by the time it got to Verulamium, it could flow downhill by gravity, and there you have your fountains, you have your water for the baths, you have your drinking water. And nobody had ever known before how Verulamium had got its water supply. And this gang here found it and discovered it. The other thing, of course, that they discovered was how little there was to discover. And what's remarkable, everyone's always talked about Verulamium as being one of the biggest Roman cities. Well, it was in terms of extent and the length of the walls, but it was jolly empty inside. There's nothing new about garden cities. You know, Welwyn Garden City, Letchworth Garden City. Well, this was Verulamium hortus herbs, because it was mostly green space inside. And we don't quite know why and why it ended up like that. But that, again, is a discovery of these guys. And, you know, again, we're very proud to be part of that innovation. And, you know, Chris really has pushed the envelope on this kind of stuff. The next word, we talk about discover, protect, innovate, inform. And the next word is the word protect. And I suppose Janice, in her introduction, talked about the clock tower, and I will talk a bit more about the clock tower in due course, but that was incredibly significant and was going to be knocked down to be replaced by the Victorian equivalent of a shopping centre. And the city council at that time said, what is the purpose of this building? It had stopped being a semaphore station with the arrival of the telegraph, and it wasn't used as a prison anymore. And they said, what is the purpose of this building? And it was our society that said, hell, this really matters. It's part of our history. It's part of our birthright. And we campaigned to keep it. And indeed, together with the Civic Society, we still man it during the summer months with our group of people called the Clocketeers, so that people can still visit the clock tower. But these pictures show the Abbey Gateway, and we made significant financial contributions towards its restoration and preservation, and a little ancient window in St. Stephen's Church, where again we also paid for it to be uncovered, unblocked, and renovated in the way that you see there. One of our members, the artist Frederick Kitten, campaigned to save this building. When I first came to St. Albans, I think it was Timothy White's. It then became Boots, I think. It most recently has been Jack Will's, and it's about to be a very bijou new boutique called Anthropology. But it's impossible to imagine St. Albans without that building and that view of the Abbey. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Society campaigned to make sure that that was preserved. And then here is the clock tower again. And this is the oldest known photograph of St. Albans. It was taken by Francis Frith. There are two images because it was designed to be shown stereoscopically. It was taken, we believe, in 1856. So the Society was the grand age of 11 years old when it was taken. Quite interesting because it shows the shop that used to exist in front of the clock tower when the City Council was trying to generate income from this building. And in the distance on the right-hand side, you can see the faint outline of building works, and that would have been the demolition and then construction of the Corn Exchange, what is currently the Corn Exchange. So, and this photograph we bought in auction as a society because we saw it was up for sale and we thought it was important that it was preserved for public use, and it's available for inspection in our library at Sandridge Gate in St Albans. So moving on, 3 people here. In the middle, you can see Lord Grimthorpe, and you certainly wouldn't want to meet him on a dark and stormy night down a narrow alleyway. He was never a member of the society, and the society and he crossed swords in many different ways. But he was the man that restored the Abbey. I mean, we campaigned to save the Abbey, but we were very unhappy with the final outcome, where essentially the church gave this man carte blanche to restore it. He essentially bought his way in. He said, I will spend the money. And the church said, well, we'll take your money, and so we will let you do it. But 2 people at least had some restraint on him, both of whom were members of the society. On the left-hand side, it's Lord Aldenham, who got the faculty to repair and restore the great altar screen at the end of the presbytery that goes up above the reredos of the high altar in front of the Alban shrine. On the right-hand side is the Dean, the Reverend Lawrence, who had the difficult task of trying to square the circle between Aldenham and Grimthorpe, because Aldenham basically had managed to bag the rights to restore the screen, and he was very determined that it should incorporate a giant cross or crucifix. And this was pretty revolutionary stuff. And Grimthorpe came from a much more evangelical background and was hopping mad about any idea about there being any kind of crucifix on the screen. Aldenham stuck to his guns. There was the most astonishing exchange of letters. And if you go up into the Abbey Muniment, you will find this correspondence, and just reading it, you want to sort of cover your ears and put your fingers in your ears, because they are just so vituperative at one another. And again, we're going to show examples of those letters in our exhibition, and we're going to record some of those exchanges so that they'll be played over voice recordings. In the end, Aldenham did win, because it was held that he did have the right to restore the screen, and we see it today with its gigantic cross forming the centerpiece. But that was one of these interesting battles where the society was involved. This next picture shows the town hall looking faintly down at heel. It goes through regular periods of being down at heel because they can never resolve dealing with the rain runoff from it. My wife's an architect, and she will comment about the fact that there are some significant failures in the way it is designed and dealing with runoff. And this was just before one of the periodic restorations, picture taken about 1914, I believe. And this is here because the museum started here, and the museum was founded by the society. And indeed, it was the reason we had started as the St Albans Architectural Society. We then became the St Albans Architectural and Archaeological Society because of doing the archaeology in Gorhambury and so on. And then because we founded the museum, and the museum housed artifacts from across the county and was the Hertfordshire Museum, we became the St Albans and Hertfordshire Architectural and Archaeological Society. So the Hertfordshire came into our title. And the museum started in this building before it moved to the Hatfield Road premises, which were funded by Earl Spencer. We, of course, then that was sold, and the museum has now returned to its original home, rather magnificently to its original home in the town hall. And again, our society was very closely involved in fundraising to allow that to happen. And we have a prominent place in the list of donors in the front entrance hall. Another example of where we have protected is in the Kingsbury Barn. Now, Adam and Jill Singer bought Kingsbury Manor down in St Michael's, and this barn rather sadly sat behind. You can see in what a state of repair or disrepair it was, and it was next door to the Kingsbury Dairy, and the dairy kept the milk floats in this barn, but it was in a very sad condition. And Adam and Jill, who are members of the society, bought the barn, incorporated it into their own property, and then set about restoring it. And the society was very much involved in that. Roger Miles, who leads on us for archaeology, took to pieces, examined and recorded all the ironwork, all the nails, all the braces, all the ties, and made sure that was recorded. And there it is in its final glory. And it is the most magnificent building. It's the most important non-ecclesiastical medieval building in St Albans, a great tribute to Adam and Jill, because they will never get the money back from it that they spent on it. And it's now available for use, for charitable use. And some of you may well have been there for different events. And we're very proud that they are members of our society, and also that we were involved, as I say, in making sure that the archaeology was done on that building. We didn't always win. 2 losses here. On the left-hand side, the building that used to be called the Mansion, and for those of you who are members of the Arcanarch, the latest electronic edition has got a photograph of this building in its original glory. Wonderful ground floor as well, ironwork fence in front. It was a proper townhouse. We did our best to save it. We lost. There was some particularly important woodwork and paneling inside which was lost. So that, I'm afraid, was where we did not succeed. And on the right-hand side, Hall Place at the top of St. Peter's Street. And again, this was really an important mansion, and it was knocked down. The allegation was that it was damp. We fought to keep it. We lost. The only plus side is that Hall Place Gardens allowed Percival Blow, the architect, to build some really quite distinguished Edwardian suburban housing development, which is now quite highly regarded, and indeed he is the subject of one of our recent publications. The third word in my list of 4 words is innovate, and this is where I would argue that we have been really significantly different from other local history societies in terms of our impact on the national scene. The first person I'm going to talk about is Sir John Evans, a remarkable man. He ran the paper mills over at Apsley, but he was also a great numismatist. He was a member of our society and lectured to our society. And his great significance was that he was the person that pushed for and generated the concept of treasure trove. And it was because people before treasure trove happened, when you found gold bullion or other valuables, you were only rewarded to the bullion value of what those were. And there was no incentive for people, therefore, not to just melt stuff down. So who knows what was discovered and just melted down for its gold or silver value, because there was no reward from the government. And Evans fulminated about this, campaigned about this, lobbied Parliament. I'm not saying that it was purely through his society hat that he did this, his Arcanarch Society hat. He was a member of the Arcanarch. He was a member of the British Numismatists Society. He was a member of various other groups. And through all these channels, he campaigned. And although it was after he died, the concept of treasure trove was actually enacted into law. These pictures here come from something called the Park Street Hoard. It's called the Park Street Hoard because it was found in Park Street in 1886. And this was a bunch of angels and other coins from, I think, Edward II's reign that were found in the roof of a building in Park Street. And this was one of the things that really impelled Evans to push for treasure troves so that finds like these would be preserved. These were preserved. They were snaffled by the British Museum, the Fitzwilliam and the Ashmolean, and they've never, ever been on public display. And we are hoping when the exhibition at St Albans Museum and Gallery happens about our history, that we will be able to actually exhibit some of these coins, not the whole hoard, but some of these coins for the first time in history, that they'll come out of some dusty drawer somewhere and be able to be seen in the place and area where they were found. Another significant person in our history and in the country's history was William Page. I mean, he's probably the single most distinguished local historian that we have had as one of our members. He was a very active member of the Arcanarch, but he also saved the Victoria County History series. When I was at school, all the Victoria County histories for the entire country took up shelves and shelves at the school library. Red Morocco binding, I remember. I never looked at them, it looked far too daunting. There are 4 volumes alone on Hertfordshire, and this one you can see was edited by William Page himself, but he edited also and coordinated the entire series, kept it from going bankrupt, raised the money for it, and it remains a most significant source of local history for local historians right throughout the kingdom. And that again is something that was done by the St Albans Arcanarch. Mortimer Wheeler's excavations. Before they happened, we commissioned as a society some aerial photography. And that was when it was first realized that you could learn an awful lot in the right light conditions by photographing from the air. And we commissioned this to be done. This is the plan that was given to the pilots so that they would be able to know what it was they were supposed to be photographing. And this is one of the pictures. And on the left-hand side, you can see the straight line of the drive up to Gorhambury, from Blue House Hill up to Gorhambury. And you can see the wiggly line of the River Ver on the right-hand side, and what looks like to me a former course of the River Ver. I don't know if that's true or not. I only picked that picture of all of them because it was the most recognizable geographically, but those pictures are still in the Verulamium Museum, and a sign again about how we were always pushing the envelope. This is Norman Davy, another active member of our society, and he was also Deputy Director at the Building Research Establishment in Garston. And Shepherd Freer came in after the Second World War to do excavations along the line of the route of Blue House Hill, the road that was built to bypass St Michael's Village. And in the course of those excavations, he found these absolutely magnificent painted Roman plaster walls, which had fallen but were preserved. And no one had any idea how they could be lifted and then restored so that they could be demonstrated to the public. And it was Norman Davy, using his technological expertise from the BRE, who worked out how to do it. Now that's why we have those magnificent wall paintings at Verulamium Museum, but anywhere you go in the world where there are Roman plaster paintings on display, they all use the same techniques that he devised. I mean, it literally was world leading, and it hasn't been bettered since. And it came from one of our members who was able to use his expertise to make sure that this restoration and preservation was done. The last word in my list of 4 is the word inform. And we've always been involved in information. And one of the things that we did was to start to set up plaques to provide explanatory information at different key sites. And the first one that we put up was to explain about the British Causeway. It was at the base of the causeway, at the corner of the lake, before you go up the hill to King Harry Lane. There's the old causeway going up the hill. The Roman walls must be there behind you. And I've done my best to decipher what is in this photograph, and I will read it to you, because actually it's a bit of a hoot, quite frankly. It reads, "The British Causeway of remote antiquity, which subsequently restrained the waters of the Roman lake of Verulamium and the succeeding Saxon fishpool of the Mercian kings," in capital letters. "The depression here was made by Abbot Aelfric in 970 when he drained the lake, the bed of which is," and then blah, 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 I can't read it. "Then over this causeway," in capital letters again, "St. Alban passed to martyrdom in AD," and I think it reads 303. Now, all I will say about all that information is that it's a triumph, I think, of something over factual history. Anyway, this extraordinary plaque, which really was almost fictional. We think that probably a man called Charles Ashdown drafted it. He was also the author of the famous St. Albans pageant, and it shows perhaps a level of enthusiasm. It was the height of amateur history, if you like. Some of our subsequent contributions, I think, probably were slightly more accurate. You will know this one on the clock tower about the Eleanor Cross. And if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you will see St. A and H and A, S, St. Albans and Hertfordshire Architectural and Archaeological Society. So our name is there. This map was done by a man called the Reverend Henry Fowler. How many reverends we have had in our history. This is a map that he did of all the architectural findings in the Abbey orchard, and therefore what the monastic complex must have looked like. He was second master at St. Albans School, and there are a number of copies of this map, not all in particularly good condition, and we'll be trying to show the best of them at the exhibition at the Museum and Gallery when it happens. The Reverend Boutell, who was the curate at Sandridge I mentioned at the start of the talk, who was part of the founding fathers, rather a dodgy character. You wouldn't want to trust him with your money. He was a bit, shall we say, slack with his finances, but he did some absolutely monumentally important work on the study of monumental brasses. And this is the title page of his seminal book on monumental church brasses, addressed to the Right Honourable the President and to the members of the St. Albans Architectural Society. These pages are, with the sanction of the committee, inscribed by their devoted and faithful servant, the author. The president of the society then was Right Honourable because it was the Earl of Verulam. I'm afraid that the Right Honourable tag does not continue to this day, or at least not with me. On the left-hand side, you've got that wonderful brass of Abbot de la Mare, which is in the Abbey and is probably the single most important ecclesiastical brass in England. And there's a very good case to be said that certainly without Boutell and without the society, it might have been lost, because there was a time when people did not pay much attention to these, and he was a key part of raising their profile and how important they are. And because I'm talking about Abbot de la Mare, I shall move seamlessly to this postcard of the first St. Albans pageant, the 1907 pageant, because this shows the reenactment of Abbot de la Mare facing down the revolting peasants in the Peasants' Revolt. I'm always very interested in in the pageants, because when I first came to St Albans, I lived in Pageant Road, which was built just after this pageant happened and was named after the pageant. This next slide shows a number of our publications. On the right-hand side, the book published in partnership with the University of Hertfordshire, St Albans Life on the Home Front, which received a lot of plaudits and has been a really powerful example of what a local history society can do. Top centre, our most recent publication on the St Albans architect Percival Blow. Bottom centre, the history of the old town hall by the former curator of the museum, Chris Green. And on the left-hand side, again, a co-production with the Hertfordshire Records Society, our book on 17th century wills, the first of a 3-volume series. The book on wills may sound dry, but I can tell you it is deeply fascinating. It absolutely just unfolds life in the 17th century, and it lists everything. So people's pillows, secondhand sheets, stuff with a hole in it, you name it, it is listed. And what is again important about all of these is that every member of the society can be involved. The St Albans in the First World War book was a team effort. The wills was a team effort. A number of people worked on the Percival Blow book. And if people want to get involved in writing, want to get involved in research, they can be tutored, they can be educated, they're led, they're given a section to do. And an awful lot of people really had an awful lot of fun doing this, and a sense of achievement at the end that they've been part of a piece of genuine academic scholarship which is added to our local history knowledge. As a society, we also produce a quarterly newsletter, so it comes out 4 times a year. And this last year, we won the award for the best newsletter of any history society in the whole of the UK. And it's fabulous. We're getting the prize there from Professor, I can't remember her name, but a very distinguished history professor gave us the prize at the British Association for Local History. And it's full of wonderful snippets. And one of the recent editions, one of our members studied art at the old St Albans Art School in Victoria Street, and there was a life class, and the model was Quentin Crisp. You may remember the stately homo of England. And she described the acute embarrassment of this all as this man stark naked. He'd painted himself red all over for some reason, pranced in front of them, and they had to paint him. Just hysterically funny, but again, a little vignette of a piece of St Albans history that otherwise would have been lost. And the magazine is full of things like that. Then, of course, we have our lecture program. We have 24 lectures a year. We have conferences. The top left is the recent conference we organized on the life and death of Roman Verulamium. We have seminars at our library where people can discuss pieces of research they're doing, and people can come and pick up tips about how to get involved in historical research. The library is a magnificent room. We're very lucky to have it. It's at Sandridge Gate. It's open 2 mornings a week, Wednesday mornings and Friday mornings. Apart from Hertfordshire Archives, it's the best local history collection in Hertfordshire. And there's always people there to give advice and give tips and help you and find the stuff that you want to find. And then this is the last item I've got to show. I'm sorry it's slightly out of focus. And this is the Wheatomstead Ewer. So it's very close to home for you all. And this was discovered when they did the construction work for the railway line at Wheatomstead. And it's believed to be part of the most significant burial of a British chieftain. And it was instantly snaffled by the British Museum, and it has never, ever been on public display. ever. It's just seized by the British Museum and it's in some cellar somewhere. And we would dearly love to be able to display it at our exhibition. I can tell you it's been like drawing hen's teeth. It has been incredibly challenging, and we have gone head to head with the British Museum. The problem is that each area is run by its own subject curator. So even if you go to the director of the British Museum, he will just say, it's more than my job's worth, it's up to so-and-so. And if so-and-so thinks that it's too bad or dangerous, or why should any small local history society have this, then they are little princes in their own fiefdom. So we're still fighting for it. We're still lobbying for it. Chris Lockyer is making representations via University College London. We're using other sources. The one positive side of delaying the exhibition because of coronavirus, it was supposed to be opening in June, i.e. just in a month's time. The one positive thing is that we might in the end be able to squeeze this out and get it displayed. And frankly, I do think it's a scandal that a national museum can behave like that. It really is. I mean, this is, you know, part of our patrimony, and the people of Wheatamstead and the people of St Albans should be able to see it. So fingers crossed, we will manage that. So here's the legal bit. These are the people who've given us permission to show the various images and people who have helped. And then just to say, there is our website, stalbanshistory.org. We are going to be practicing and running online presentations, I hope without interruptions from window cleaners and more competence on the part of the speaker in terms of the slideshow, but we will be continuing to run those from the autumn. We have our quarterly magazine, and we'd be jolly pleased if any of you who are not members, if you would like to join. And one of the things, as I say, is that, you know, we'll be involved in archaeology. The next archaeological dig we hope to have will be with Chris Lockyer and at the new school in Harpenden, because at the back of that, at the very far corner, are the most significant burials, which again need to be excavated. And we're hoping to do that as a community archaeology project, and indeed with the involvement of the school. And with luck, again, once we at the end of social distancing, at the end of this whole hideous coronavirus epidemic, we will be able to do something there. So at this point, I will stop the screen share, I hope, or it'll be stopped for me. There we are. And there we are. And I hope that that was interesting and useful. And I hand over to Richard to chair for questions.
Thank you very much, Sandy. That was very interesting indeed. Thank you. We're going to invite questions now. So if you do have a question, can you just raise your hand like that? One or two people can't see you at the moment. I don't think you've got your video switched on. So if you, it doesn't matter, but if you do want to ask a question, obviously you need to make sure that the video doesn't have a red line through it. I would just ask you to bear with us, because it is obviously isn't going to be quite as easy to spot people with their hands up as it would be if we were all sitting together in the memorial hall.
David Singleton, I saw, put his hand up.
Right.
David Singleton put his hand up.
David Singleton, right.
You didn't.
You not?
Not intentionally, no, I gave you a clap sign.
Oh, did you? Oh, fair enough.
Right. Okay.
Have I really won? That sounds a bit...
I don't know. Let's look. Oh, yes. Christine. Oh, no, it's...
I be the only one that's not? What's going on?
I'm just allowing everybody to unmute themselves. So if you have a question and you want to unmute yourself, please do so.
Peter Burley, who's slightly cheating, but he's raised his hand, I see.
Right, okay.
Well, while people are thinking of questions about the presentation, you might like to say a few words about where we are in the light of current circumstances, both with the exhibition and also with our lecture series, so people know what may or may not be in the offing over the next, frankly, year or so.
Yes, actually, Peter, thank you. Peter, by the way, is my deputy president. So he's the one that keeps me legal, decent, honest, and truthful. And a jolly good deputy president he is. We were, I mean, this is our 175th anniversary, and we were supposed to be having a major exhibition at the new museum and gallery in St Albans, opening on June the 18th, and Lord and Lady Verulam were going to do the honours. That clearly now is not going to happen. We've done all the preparation for it. So when and if the museum reopens, then we'll be ready to go. Although initially, because they got an exhibition about Hanley Page, which was only open for a few weeks before the lockdown happened. So they want to give Hanley Page a good run for its money, and they will then hope to slot us in. So what we're doing is creating an online version of the exhibition, which we will launch on June the 18th, and it will have some voice recordings, and it will have the images, and we hope it will inspire people to come and see the actual thing. I mean, I'm hoping we will have coins from the Park Street hoard. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we might eventually shame the British Museum into giving us the Wheatamstead Ewer. And then also there's a brilliant young student at the University of Hertfordshire who is part of her MA. She's in the model building art design part of the University of Hertfordshire. She's building the most fantastic model of the clock tower, and we're hoping to have that in our physical exhibition. Then the other thing that we were hoping to have is a gala lecture by Professor Michael Wood, whom you will probably all know from his television appearances, most recently about a very intriguing Chinese poet called Du Fu. And he did a whole program on him, but Alexander the Great, he did a program on Codicut, you may remember, various things. And he was due to come and speak to us in July. Again, almost certainly that's not going to happen, but he has very kindly assured us that subject to his broadcasting commitments and diary commitments, when we come out of this whole hideous lockdown, he will then be able to give us a new date. So that's something else to also be looking forward to. So it's frustrating, but we will get there in the end. Even in the end, these things happen in our 176th year rather than our 175th year.
Thank you, Sandy. Yes, John.
Yeah, could you tell us where that beautifully restored barn is in St Albans?
Yes, certainly. It's in Branch Road, St Albans. So when Branch Road is the little road that connects Verulam Road, Folly Lane with St Michael's Village. And it's just down there. Kingsbury Manor is next to the Kingsbury Mill, which is the Waffle House with a piece of pudding stone in front of it. That's Kingsbury Manor. And the barn behind it, which was one of the original Abbey tithe barns. So the Abbey set this up so that yokels and oiks and so on could come and bring their produce for the monks to then lead the high life from. So it's one of the original tithe barns. You can't, I'm afraid, go and visit it in the normal course of events, but it's frequently open because it's used for art exhibitions or other charitable events. So if you keep your eyes peeled, you will see occasions where there might be a concert, there might be an art exhibition. It generally is only in the summer because there is no heating, and any kind of space heating in there, I think, would be a bit hairy in terms of fire risk. So it's normally summer events, but it is the most magnificent building, and one just has to take one's hat off to Adam and Jill Singer for spending a huge amount of money in preserving it. And the idea they have is that even if they move on, they want to try and leave it as a public resource for the city of St. Albans. Jill Singer, by the way, is secretary of the Civic Society, and they are the joint runners, if you like, the joint custodians of the clock tower. They and we look after the clock tower in terms of organising people to be there so that tourists can visit it.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? No? Okay.
I'm disappointed.
Yes. Sorry, carry on, Sandy, yes. Janice, is there anything you want to say at this point?
Oh, someone's waving.
Oh, hang on, somebody, right.
There we are.
Right,
It's-
okay.
It's Peter.
Right, Peter. I need you to unmute yourself, I think, Peter. There we are. Thank you.
To thank Andy for his presentation. I think it was brilliant. And also to thank Richard for coordinating it so extremely well. For the first time that it's happened, it's the first time I've used it, and I'm really impressed, and I hope we see many more. Thanks a lot.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's not too difficult to use, I don't think. There doesn't be too much that can go wrong, touch wood.
Just window cleaners, I can tell you.
Well,
He just does turn up when he feels like it, and clearly he suddenly felt that he just felt like it.
well, he wanted to hear your talk, I think.
Yes. Was it very audible? Could you hear a banging?
It was very, very clear, actually.
Yes,
Well, it certainly was to me. I mean, I
That's
hope
why
it was
I
to everybody
thought I
else.
probably should go and stop it. And the clock,
Yes.
and the clock chimed occasionally. It may have
Oh,
caused
well.
no, but yeah.
I think we can live with that, yes. Well, thank you very much, Sandy. That was really very interesting. And as I say, it was very clear. I certainly had, absolutely no difficulty hearing it. And there was sometimes when you have Zoom sessions, you get things get frozen for a second or two, and you miss the odd syllable. But we all heard you, I think, very clearly this afternoon. So thank you very much for that.
And do join www.stalbanshistory.org. I really commend it. We would love to have you as members if you aren't already a member. And
Right,
I think
okay.
you can have a lot of fun in all sorts of ways.
Excellent,
So we really
yes.
hope that happens.
Well, you certainly whetted our appetite, so thank you for that, Sandy, yes.
Well,
Well, I think this afternoon's been a great success. I hope everybody else does as well. I know it's not quite the same thing as all being together in person, but I think it's been an awful lot better than not doing it at all. So I think it's been very successful. As I mentioned earlier, we will look into the possibility of holding another virtual meeting like this if the present restrictions continue, and obviously if we have another speaker who, like Sandy, is happy to give it a go. So we'll be in touch on that and send you another email as and when. I think it just remains for me to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you particularly, Sandy, for your really interesting talk. And we all look forward to seeing one another again before too long. So, thank you, and bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.